The others will introduce. Hello, everyone. I'm Stanley Maloy. I'm the editor-in-chief of JMBE. It's great to have you all join us today. And the others will introduce yourselves as we go along, but I'm going to give a real brief introduction about JMBE. You know, one of the real key things that will engage our discussion today is this concept that effective science education is really critical to give people an understanding of the kind of science that affects both their personal lives and society in ways that are so important for all of us. And that's a core aspect of scientific literacy, which we're going to be talking more about. But I'd like to first start off and say, why JMBE? Why the Journal of Microbiology and Biology Education? You know, one of the things that almost every dedicated teacher does is they constantly twiddle with approaches and tweak content and try new things, always trying to improve the way you teach and help students learn more effectively. But as we do that, very often it's just based on anecdotal evidence. And like all other areas of scientific knowledge, meaningful improvements in education really require evidence-based insights into effective teaching approaches. This means building on prior scientific research on education and also catalyzing further research that can improve things even more. And in fact, sharing your results and conclusions with others to promote broader educational changes that impact student lives, university practices, and future science are one of the things that's so critical in thinking about education really moving forward. JMBE has a great group of editors, and JMBE's editors are really focused on helping authors publish meaningful education research. Not just rejecting X number of papers, but trying to help papers be published in a way that they can have the greatest impact. And JMBE has a continuous publication approach that ensures that your research will get out there in the public realm and have an impact even sooner. Now, once a year, JMBE publishes a special issue that's focused on a particularly timely and important topic. And Justin is going to tell you more about the 2023 special issue, upcoming special issue on scientific literacy. Justin.
All right. Thanks, Stanley. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. So my name is Justin Shaffer. I'm a teaching professor in the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering at the Colorado School of Mines. And I also, before we get into the details, want to introduce my fellow guest editor, Mike, if you want to introduce yourself too.
Sure, thank you. My name is Mike Wolyniak. I'm a professor of biology at Hampden-Sydney College in Farmville, Virginia.
Okay, thanks. And both Mike and I are here today representing the team. And Miriam, you haven't been introduced yet. I think it's time for you too. So please do.
Thanks, Justin. My name is Miriam Segura-Totten. I'm the senior editor for the special series at JMBE. Oh, and I'm a professor at the University of North Georgia.
Great. So Miriam recruited myself and Mike and a few others to be guest editors on this special series, which is going on now. And we just want to spend a couple minutes piggybacking on Stanley's intro to tell you more about the call specifically. So Rachel, I think is it okay if I share the just the actual call, the website? I was going to bring that up so we can walk through it. I think everyone's probably seen it already. Oh, there's the link too, if people can grab that link if we can't share it. But I'll just get going with it. So the basic idea, right, is you know, to build on the great things JMBE's doing, but specifically focus now on scientific literacy. I think you'd all agree this is a time in the world where these issues are really critical. We probably say this every year that they're ever more important, but they really are, right? Especially with the last couple of years of the pandemic and vaccine issues and climate change issues, all these other aspects of scientific literacy that we want our students to deal with, whether they're majors in biology or non-majors, and maybe even more important if they're non-majors, because if you have them for non-majors, this might be the last crack you have at really helping students develop the skills necessary to survive and interpret the world around them. So what we're looking for is papers around a variety of topics, including pedagogical practices, including effective classroom tools or instructional materials, different frameworks that might inform the development and understanding of scientific literacy, community efforts. So don't limit yourself just to the classroom. Think about your local community and how your students might be involved with them, maybe through service learning, other ways. Things you could measure, right, could include student learning, student understanding of the nature of science, quantitative literacy skills, science communication, again, assessment in both the classroom and the community, maybe even how they interact sometimes. There could be other ways to submit papers about removing barriers to access to scientific information. So helping both your students and the community be more understand information out there, whether it's valid or not, and also being inclusive through approaches to learning about scientific literacy. So those are just some of the big things we're looking for. Again, lots of different ways you can massage and think about papers that fit in these realms. But again, at the core of it should be, how do we train our students to become more scientifically literate citizens and to be able to interpret the world they're in. So that's all I had. Mike, if you had any other thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them too.
Sure. And what Justin captured really well in his comments there are the diversity of issues and the diversity of topics that fall under the umbrella of scientific literacy. When we as a group of editors got together to put together the call for articles, I think one of the things that was a challenge for us was, well, what does scientific literacy actually mean, right? Like, what is the definition and how are we encapsulating it? So I think we're excited to put together an issue that really gets at that diversity, and what one person thinks of as obvious scientific literacy, another person might look at and say, oh, wow, I never thought of it from that perspective before. I would also draw your attention, if you're unfamiliar with JMBE, to the variety of different types of papers that you can do, some of which are data driven, some of which are more based on your own experiences, some of which can be in the tips and tools, like almost a note of sorts that you found and are excited to share with people, and maybe you just haven't gotten all the testing done. So in my mind, the sky's the limit on the types of things you can put before us, and we're really excited to see what you have.
Thanks, Mike. That was a perfect segue to my section, because I will tell you guys more about the different types of manuscripts that JMBE accepts and publishes. We're a little different from some journals in that we have different kinds of manuscripts. Before I do that, though, just if you do hopefully submit an article to the special series, make sure, even though your manuscript has to conform to the policies and the sort of guidelines for the specific type of manuscript, you will be submitting to the special section. And so when you do submit, make sure you choose me, Miriam Segura-Totten, as the senior editor. And then you can pick a guest editor if you have a preference as well. But make sure it goes to me, because even though your manuscript will fit under a particular format, it will be reviewed by our team. Okay, so basically the types of categories, like Mike mentioned, there's tips and tools. Oh, and I should say something first, sorry guys, that because of the special series, we do expect some interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary papers to come in, and we're excited to see those. So there is a little more flexibility in terms of format, especially in terms of length. So those of you familiar with JMBE will know that we have length limitations, but you can go a little longer. No, I'm not saying double your length, but a little longer is fine. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay, hopefully.
So, Miriam, your bandwidth is a little bit low.
So I did notice that my system just told me that, but
we can hear you.
It's been working fine all week, but of course. Okay. Well, if I lag, I'm sorry. So anyway, little lengths, we can have a little wiggle room there. Not for tips and tools though, which is the first type, because tips and tools, like Mike said, is supposed to be something short, something novel, something you've tried in the classroom and you're excited about and you want to share for others to adopt. The main material should fit in 2 printed pages with the figures. Now you can add informational stuff like handouts or instructions for instructors in the supplemental materials, but you should keep it short. Now for the second type of manuscript curriculum, that is for innovative field-tested activities. It could be classroom, lab, field, or online activities. 2 things that come up that are hurdles for authors in this type of manuscript are that these manuscripts have to have enough details so that others can adopt what you're talking about. So a lot of times we see manuscripts come in that don't have enough detail for someone else to adopt it, but we'll tell you that during review. But if you want to save yourself that hassle, remember that. Just write it out so that others can adopt it. The second thing that is at times an issue for authors is that this type of manuscript is perhaps, at least in my opinion, the most different from the traditional research manuscript. It has a very specific format. So you have to make sure that you follow the guidelines. And I think Rachel will put in the chat now the section policies for the different types of manuscripts that JMBE accepts. And so, look at those and follow them for each type of manuscript. But curriculum, I would definitely stress, go through those point by point, because it is quite different. And one of the things that we ask you to do is to write in learning objectives for the activity. And then the stumbling block here is that a lot of authors don't align their learning objectives for the activity with the assessment and with the data that they got. And so you want to make sure that there's that alignment, that if you have learning objectives, your assessments respond to those learning objectives, that they're actually measuring the learning objectives, and that you can tell us the story of whether your activity met or did not meet the learning objectives. So you want to watch out for that. The third type of manuscript is the research manuscript. This is, kind of your standard research manuscript. It has to be original research, hypothesis-driven research on biology education. You must have rigorous assessment, and your assessment needs to align with your hypothesis or your research questions. And then the perspectives is the last type of manuscript. It's like a review article, or different journals call it different ways, but it is like a review article. And basically what you want to do is you take the topic or the problem in biology education that you're interested in, and you're putting it into a broader view. So you'll want to identify that problem. And one of the things that we see here is that sometimes authors don't back up their problem or putting things in a big perspective with enough of a literature search and literature background. So you want to make sure you have that your problem or as you see it is grounded in the published literature, that you talk about what's been done in the past to address this problem. And then you give your viewpoint on the problem, and you can include your own data. So another question we get a lot is if perspectives articles can include data, and they can. But just make sure to put everything back in the big picture and to finish out with, how do we move forward? And so that's it for all the different types of manuscripts. And I believe now we'll open it up for questions unless someone else has something to say. You're muted, Stanley.
One of the first questions we have is, how do you spell your name? It's actually written right on the screen here, and how people can contact you for submissions.
Thank you. So I will respell my name because it's not a simple one in the chat. And I can't. Okay, so I'll ask Rachel because I can't. I can answer. Can I answer in the Q&A and write my name? Okay, that's what I'll do. I will type the answer once I find. I don't see it. Oh my.
Miriam, it's in the answered section of the Q&A.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Can I also answer? Okay, I'll go ahead and answer it on there.
And so we encourage the audience to ask questions, but meanwhile, I will ask a couple of questions, maybe to get people thinking some more about this. And the first question I was going to ask, Mike, you led right into it. That is, I was going to say, okay, how do you define scientific literacy? And I realize that there are different definitions, but it would be interesting to hear how you and Justin define scientific literacy, and if you agree on what it is.
All right, I'll go first. So to me, scientific literacy would be thinking about it in terms of not being a scientist, but being a citizen. What do I need to know, and what do I need to understand that would allow me and allow people around me to be able to make informed decisions about society, informed decisions that would affect not just me, but those around me. Discipline would not be material there, right? It would just be that general question. One of the questions actually in the Q&A right now is about, is this call just for microbiology only? And I would say no, right? That one of the things that JMBE has done the last few years, to my benefit, I am not a trained microbiologist, is expanded their realm into the life sciences in general. So you do not need to confine yourself to microbiology questions to give us your ideas for this. So I would look at it from a societal perspective. So Justin, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. And also I'm not a microbiologist at all. I don't even pretend. But yeah, so definitely cross-disciplinary, very welcome for this call. Yeah, for me, scientific literacy is echoing a lot what Mike said. It's about being able to you know, understand and again interpret the world around you, whether it's the news, the TV, other social media, or literally the world around you. I'm going to try to find it, put in the chat if I can, but there's a great like 2-minute clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson in an interview once where he defined scientific literacy. It's not the ability to, you know, tell you how the microwave works or to be able to understand or describe the parts of a cell. But again, it's rather to see the world through a scientific lens and be able to evaluate the world around you. Again, it's not, again, just a list of facts, memorization, which sometimes biology gets a bad, you know, bad rap for. But again, it's about being able to apply your understanding of the natural world and science, different scientific disciplines to make decisions that ultimately inform yourself, your family, your community, your society. So there's definitely a bigger level of that. And that's not just, again, with facts or terms, right? It should be quantitative. It should be able to deal with data and numeracy skills and scientific reasoning and be able to make an argument and defend it. So being able to use all that. And I think that's even, we say it every year, I'm saying it again, it's ever more important to be able to do this because again, you look at the data on things that are published out there, whether it's just a headline in an article, or if you actually look at the figure itself, you got to be able to make the call yourself to understand what's going on and whether it applies or not.
So there are a couple of questions I think directly tie into what each of you has just said. So Carlos has asked, would ethical reasoning and argument dissection of scientific case studies be considered scientific literacy? And what types of assessment data would you expect for curriculum style articles related to scientific literacy?
So I would think on it, thinking about the assessment part first, if the primary objective is, are you showing improved scientific literacy or not, that assessment based on some kind of pre-post testing or some kind of questions you can ask in survey form that would show some kind, I mean, pick a topic, right? I mean, I assume stuff you'll be writing, there'll be some foundation in some issue or other. And can you show pre to post that people are using a more maybe evidence-based approach, for instance, for formulating their opinions or ideas, or are they able to use a more sophisticated approach? Now, how do you measure sophistication, right? So there would be probably designing a rubric for that and using that as well. So that would be my thought about the assessment. And would ethical reasoning and argument dissection be considered topic literacy? I'd say absolutely, right? I mean, I can tell you that something would benefit me or the environment, but maybe it comes at the cost of something significant. I mean, that's a huge ethical quandary. So yeah, there's going to be an intersection there that absolutely would make it worthwhile.
So a follow-up to this, I think that ties on a similar issue is Jeff asked, will this issue in any way acknowledge the research by Dan Kahn and others showing that scientific literacy is not necessarily a good predictor of acceptance of or support for science-based decision-making, especially around controversial topics?
I can't say. Oh, sorry, Miriam. You can jump in. No. Okay. They say I can't say for sure, Jeff. It's a good question. If folks have research that ties into that question about acceptance with scientific literacy as a background or potential controlling factor for the analysis, I think that'd be really exciting to learn about. I'm not familiar with this work from Dan Kahn, but I'm going to check it out for sure. But I think that's a really great thing, because what we're trying to do, right, is hopefully build and improve student scientific literacy. But is it actually going to stick? Is it going to stay? There's been some data years ago with the acceptance of evolution, and during the actual course, students will self-report that, yes, my views on evolution have changed for the purpose of this course, such that I earn a higher grade and answer correctly. But as soon as they leave the class, they go right back to their original frame of thinking. So I wonder if that kind of temporal effect happens too with acknowledging scientific literacy. Yeah. So if you're interested in doing that yourself, Jeff, or if others on the call are interested, I think we would definitely accept that type of paper.
I mean, I would like to think of this issue as sort of furthering a conversation, right? And so if there's a conversation about, oh, not only are we not sure about we're all excited about scientific literacy, but maybe we're not sure of its efficacy. If we have data about that one way or another, I think that's a really exciting thing that we can include in this issue.
So assessment of scientific literacy is always an interesting issue. We have a couple of assessment questions. So Holly asked, what do you consider rigorous assessment, right? And so
I might take that one.
Go for it.
At least start, because there's a couple of things I wanted to say there. Also to Carlos's question on assessment for curriculum pieces. For me, in particular, for scientific literacy, Mike and Justin both talked to this, that scientific literacy is hard to define, and there's many definitions out there. So if I were you, I would start by picking a definition of scientific literacy, or picking an aspect or aspects of scientific literacy that your, pedagogical intervention, whatever it is you're writing up, addresses. And so define those very well in the manuscript, and then make sure your assessment lines up with the definition of scientific literacy or aspects of scientific literacy that you picked. To me, that would be very helpful. And then in terms of rigorous assessment, I think that alignment is number one. Number two, for research articles, we're looking for direct measures of student learning, or of meeting or of testing your hypothesis. For example, if your hypothesis is that a certain intervention will increase scientific literacy as defined by this assessment, then you will want to have a pre-post test, as Mike had mentioned before, where students have to complete a task or complete that survey, that assessment, and you can, statistically show, right, that there's a difference and there's an increase in literacy. Student reported mesh, that's nice to see their perspectives on how they feel they did, but a student telling you, I feel like I did this or that, is not going to be as rigorous as a direct measure. The second thing is, if you can show something, if you have triangulation of data, if you have more than one piece of data, more than one assessment that speaks to or that supports your hypothesis, that's going to be more rigorous than just one piece.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, guys?
That's an excellent answer. and spoken like someone who's had more experience in this. So yeah, I mean, I think that the important thing you say there, it's simple, but it's really powerful. 2 is better than 1, right? If you've got multiple ways of getting to that big picture, then that's going to be a really effective means of showing that you've done what you set out to do.
There's another question that was answered online, but the question referred to a study that may be so small that it's getting a good, rigorous statistical validation is very difficult. And the answer to that was basically, that's a place where you should consider tips and tools as an opportunity for study that will stimulate further thinking and may lead to bigger studies afterwards. So One of the other questions that was asked is when you start thinking about scientific literacy, there's this whole movement of citizen science and community science, and would those frameworks with the proper kind of evaluation data be of interest relative to scientific literacy?
I would think certainly, right? I mean, that those citizen science initiatives are driven primarily by the idea of getting people excited about science and learning more about the basics of scientific questions. So I would think absolutely.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I agree totally, Mike. Yeah, and especially if it's the data of interest, like you said there, Christine, eval data of interest. So if you have something that fits with its survey data, if it's pre-post type data from point of view or attitudinal things, yeah. So just have the appropriate assessment tag to it. And even if that doesn't, if the study like that, a research study doesn't work out so well, you can do the teaching tip or the other type of more curriculum type paper. So I think it would be welcome in a lot of formats.
So the next question is really kind of a technical publishing question, Miriam. So I'm sending this to you. I have a blog article that nicely falls in tips and tools category for the special series. I shared it with my university's faculty forum blog. Is it still eligible for JMBE publication?
I feel like you know the answer to this, Stanley, and I don't. I think we've talked about this before, and now I've forgotten. So do you mind taking that one?
Sure. So the answer is what you would publish as tips and tools probably is not an exact example of your blog article, but ASM journals overall, including JMBE, now accept preprints. It's a standard thing. Pretty often, people will do a preprint before their publication, and a blog article like this that was shared with your university's faculty, it is almost like a preprint. I think you would want to take that information and flush it out and turn it into a real tips and tools article for it to be meaningful and different. And so that I think would be a good recommendation on this. Right? We do not allow you to simply publish a paper in some journal and then reproduce that paper in JMBE. A preprint or some just form of a preprint like this, I think, is a different story here. So, and Ben asked the question, how long will it take to hear from review results if a manuscript is submitted to JMBE? And we're working on decreasing the time for submission. Our average time right now is between 60 and 70 days. That includes time for review, time to go back and forth with comments. And so we try to shorten that as much as possible. But we also want to make sure that we give people real thorough review and that the standards of JMBE are really recognized as being very high quality. So let me shift and ask a question here. And that is, one of the things about scientific literacy is really, we're not talking about assessment of what you've learned when you left class. We're talking about assessment of how you're going to be able to apply that throughout your life, right? And so one aspect of this is really getting people to be engaged in lifelong learning so that they're able to think about these new problems that arise that may not have been problems when they started. Do you have any insights into how you think about that longer term issue?
I think that can be really hard to do in a feasible way. If it's over the 4 years of college, then, at least they're coming back and you can track that. And, I've done that in one of my papers, not so much the longitudinal tracking, but we did see differences in scientific literacy abilities using the TOSLs from freshmen versus seniors. Seniors had higher scores on that type of instrument versus freshmen. So something's going on longitudinally, but but the actual tracking. So if you have that ability to do that, that and invite students back over time, that'd be really interesting, even if it's over just the course of a year, maybe before intro bio 1 and then after bio 2, so after the full year. But once at least in my experience, once they kind of gone out into the wild after graduating, it's a bit more difficult. Not to say it's impossible, but I think that's where you really can find some interesting aspects if they have been able to apply what they've learned from scientific literacy in their careers, especially if you're maybe designing a module with that goal in mind, and you're able to invite students back a couple of years. And even if you only get a few, there's assessment methods that you can use for smaller populations, but that could be exciting to see if those the things that you've done actually have made an impact on their ability to perceive the world in terms of scientific literacy.
And I think on that same token, this doesn't really fall under the standard of rigorous assessments, but it's certainly an interesting data point if your programming involves alumni connections, that if you are having your alums that have entered maybe careers that are dedicated to something involving scientific literacy, not necessarily a hardcore scientist position, but something where they have to apply ideas of science to the law or ideas of science to government or things like that. That's a really powerful tool to show that stuff that's been going on in your programs has been having some kind of long-standing effect. So again, that's not really a traditional assessment strategy, but if you're doing something that's bringing those people back, you're sort of closing that loop of like work that you're doing in scientific literacy actually bearing fruit down the line.
So I'd like to ask one more general scientific literacy question, and then I'm going to pass it to Miriam to talk about some publishing details. And one of the interesting things that Michael and Justin, you brought up in your introduction is that major events like climate change and pandemics can really be events when scientific literacy is so important. But they can also catalyze people to think about learning. Although some of those events are really complicated by a lot of controversy, right? So in 1957, when the satellite Sputnik passed across the United States, it really catalyzed a lot of interest in scientific literacy and understanding science more broadly. But it wasn't really viewed as one of these controversial topics. It was viewed as, this is something everybody needs to know about because it's so important for the future. I'm curious if you think that there are some drivers like that might be less controversial, but really catalyze an interest in understanding and thinking critically about science.
I think the first one that comes to mind, and maybe Justin should speak on this as a resident of that part of the country, would be the stuff just coming out now about the water crisis in the Southwest and the government stepping in and saying, Arizona, Nevada, you can't have as much water as you used to. We can argue about vaccines if you'd like, but it's a tangible reality that there are some significant environmental crises going on. And again, you could argue about climate change if you'd like, but here's some evidence that this is stuff that we have to figure out. So I would think some more of those straight up environmental issues could fit your bill.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Agree with that, Mike. Even go back a couple of years to what happened in Flint and things like that. My mind went to, hopefully not the far too distant future and everything Elon's doing, man, going to Mars. I mean, can you imagine? I gotta keep my fingers crossed. I want to see that on TV. I want to see that landing. Like, I think back to the moon landing, and I wasn't alive then, but the Mars landing, how incredible that would be, and I think that with my kids. Like, I have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, and just being, if this does happen sometime soon, being able to watch that with them. We watched the rovers land, which is amazing, but putting people there, how could that not just catalyze the whole human race to embrace science even more and push it forward? Or a similar vein, if we would ever find microbial life somewhere, think in the JMBE audience, if we ever found that, how crazy that would change everything we think, and again kind of put science at the forefront. So I'm a big sci-fi guy, so my brain goes there, but I think some of those world changing events, I think, really would hopefully push forward scientific literacy and the importance of that even more and getting people just involved in science in general.
And
Thanks.
if I may add a little bit, my mind, I was a biomedical cell biologist in a previous life. So that's where my mind went. So with my students, I think, how does research produce the medicines, the insulin that your grandma takes, how is research going to, better your life medically and your family's life? And also like how to advocate. I mean, if you're, for example, biology majors, how do you advocate for your family members with their doctors about their medicines, about the side effects, about the treatments? That's a big sort of understanding how science works in terms of medical treatment.
That's great. I mean, I think that, I hope that stimulates the audience to think broadly about other kinds of topics that would relate to scientific literacy. So, Miriam, could you tell us a little bit more about the approach JMBE editors take to thinking about a manuscript and moving it forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Stanley. So, and I think this links back a little bit to the question of how long will it take for me to hear back? I think JMBE sometimes might have a longer time to decision than other journals because we are very learner-centered. So, we get a lot of people who submit who have not submitted to an education journal before. And instead of us being harsh and being like rejected, we say, okay, let's work through this. Like, these are the issues you're having. This is what you can do. We're very supportive that way. And that might mean that a paper might take 2 or 3 rounds of reviews as opposed to 1 round. Sometimes some things when I receive papers, I'll, skim through them to make sure that they will do okay during review. Every once in a while, I'll come across a paper that I can see would have a really tough time during review. So what I'll do is I literally read through it and I will do a review myself, and I will do, and this sounds harsh, but it's an editorial rejection, but it really is just me saying, hey, do these things so that when you submit, you don't get like reviewers hitting you hard. Like, your paper is going to go a lot more smoothly once you do these things. So those are the kinds of—
Rejection with love.
What's that?
It's a rejection with love.
Exactly. It's a love rejection. Yeah, no, it's really, let's put your paper in a better place so that it can do better when it goes out to reviewers. And that's the sort of way we look at things. It's a learning experience for the authors and also for the editors. So we tend to be very nurturing, and that's how we see things.
I might add, Miriam, that we are right now probably very close to about the median for education journals. We are a lot faster than many education journals and a bit slower than some others. We're not as fast as basic science journals, which have really ramped up the review process. But in contrast to what you just described, it's basically accept, reject. And so it's a real different situation in most cases there. So Miriam, another question that just came in had to do, is there a fee for submission to JMBE? Could you mention that?
Yes, there is. And Rachel, do you think you could post the link? And she has already. Look, she's awesome. So there's a link in the chat where you can click there and see what the fees are for publication in JMBE. Yeah, I think well, there used to be some waivers, but now it's more of a very, very case by case basis to waive those publication fees.
I think one of the, just to come back to this, is one of the key things when you're submitting a manuscript to a journal like JMBE is to make sure that what you're submitting is focused on JMBE. There are a lot of papers with deep philosophy about scientific literacy, but they don't address education issues, right? And so that's probably not something you would submit to JMBE. Right? JMBE should really have this focus on education, whatever the topic is, right? So so you addressed this really briefly, both Michael and Justin, but the question of how you how you evaluate scientific literacy, I think is a really important question, especially for people who, let's say, have developed this thing, you know, a piece of curriculum or a tips and tools article, and well, you know, what kinds of expectations would be reasonable for their assessment?
Well, I think the first thing to consider there is the level and rigor of assessment is going to vary by the type of article that you're submitting, right? That if you are looking at a curriculum article, a research article, as opposed to tips and tools or perspectives, then the levels will indeed be different. So say that right out of the gate. We've come up, and Miriam defined rigorous assessment quite well. Can you find a way to, you know, we sometimes always fall back on rubrics, you know, as the way to go, but there's a reason for that, right? That they give you a means of taking something and actually being able to measure it when it seems like you can't up front. Can you design assignments that you can use a rubric to ask how effective the student is in terms of addressing whatever question it is you might be interested in? And this is always where you give the pitch for a line, and I learned this from ASM, right? Aligning your assessment with what it is you actually want to do, considering backwards design, what it is you actually want to measure, then going back and saying, okay, here are the tools I'm going to use. So you don't get to the end of your class and go, oh crap, my assessment doesn't actually measure this. So all of that said, can you design instruments or use existing instruments that actually take ideas and allow you to measure through the use of a rubric, is something improving or not? There are examples out there, the LCAS survey, for instance, that allow you to measure things like iteration, not just understanding of science, but like desire to be retained in the sciences. These are not quantifiable things by themselves, but rubrics and tools have been designed to help you measure them. So I would think about that, like those kind of ideas, sort of taking them and finding ways to put measurements on them. And that's the most rigorous level, of course.
Yeah, I agree with everything Mike said there.
I sort of went into a word salad there. So yeah, that makes sense.
No,
Okay, good.
you hit it all, man. You hit it all. I think I love the idea of thinking about backward design applied to research too, right? And you know, obviously when you're writing a grant proposal or something, you kind of have to do that. You have to plan it all out and think about it. Sometimes with education, at least in my career when I started, it's like, well, let's see what we can get, you know, this first time through. But we really should be planning it around that method. I think working with a colleague too is really helpful. So if you, whether it's a colleague in education or in your department, your discipline, or even someone in psychology you might work with, just kind of running it by them. Sorry, sir.
Your local statistician.
Oh yes, that's well, yeah, that's a whole nother thing, right? Yeah, I mean, don't if you can do it yourself, kudos to you, but find partnerships, you know, and run that study design by them, see what kind of analysis you need to make. Think about, should it be a one semester or hopefully a repeat semester study? You know, that's really important, I think, to get multiple rounds of data to verify that what if you're seeing an effect really is there. It's not just a, you know, random effect you might get. And you know, and then also, you know, other literatures and things, you know, we're talking about JMBE today, but CBE Life Science Education has published some great articles on how to do linear regression and how to deal with confounding variables. So you can use other resources out there too to get ideas of the assessment that you might need. And also, I mean, I should, where's my word salad, but, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, your bench research. I've at least found in my career when I used to do that stuff that we would find other articles that kind of were, I thought, well, this is really great. Look how they did it. Look how they presented it. Look how they assessed it. Let's kind of piggyback on that. So find some good articles that you think are models for what you might want to do, and you use that as a framework for your practices. And I do apologize, everyone. I have to jump off the call now, but just wanted to say thanks for your time. And if you had any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. But of course, Miriam's the boss and she can run it to us too. So we're all doing it together. All right. Thank you guys for your time. Good luck. See ya. Bye.
And I wanted to, can I just add one thing to the assessment? You know, and I agree. I love a rubric. All my colleagues know I love rubrics, but I also wanted to put out there for research articles, qualitative methods are fine too, because we're talking a lot of quant and I love numbers, but if your research question, if qualitative methods are appropriate for your research question, we are okay with those type of papers too. So don't feel like you can only submit quantitative stuff.
So maybe just to tie things up, as an expert in scientific literacy, Mike, I wonder if you could just give us a 2-minute or so example of how you integrate scientific literacy into your teaching.
So I will think about this from the perspective of a class that I teach on a regular basis in bioethics. And I choose that one because it draws in people from all across the college, coming from all sorts of different disciplines. And as part of that course, I have the students do reaction papers every week. Not long papers, like 1-2 pages. I gotta grade these, right? And so 1-2 pages tops, reflecting on what it is that we have maybe talked about in the past week, but it doesn't necessarily have to just be that. It could be something going on in society. It could be something that's a hot topic of the moment. When I taught this class in 2014, I got very sick of Ebola, for instance, because that's what everyone was talking about and writing about. I mean, a worthwhile topic, but then after the 50th one, I got sick of reading it. But what that allows me to do over the course of a semester, if I wanted to look at it in terms of scientific literacy, is evaluate the quality of the writing, not just in terms of, is the writing coherent, but also what kind of argument is being made. Are the students not just telling me, like, you give me a book report, right? This is what's happening, but are the students actually saying, here's what's happening and here's what I think about it, and here's what should be done. Now, the challenge for me, of course, I don't want to grade this based on my opinions or my politics or anything like that, but are you taking an issue, either from the class or from what's going on out there, and effectively saying, I am understanding the issue, and here's how I think we should be as a society acting on that issue. So for me, the iteration of the assignments, like you're giving me something every week to read, and I can track, if I so choose to, right, the evolution of your writing from a scientific literacy perspective.
Great. Thanks very much, Mike. That was a great example. And
yeah.
Obviously, this is a topic that I think every educator I know thinks is so important and hopes that they have the ability to instill that in their students. And I'm really looking forward to this special issue to provide more insights to all of us and how we can do it better and more effectively and really change the world. So thanks so much. We really appreciate the questions, everybody joining us. And thanks very much, Miriam and Michael. It's great to have Justin on as well. And I have to give a special shout out for Rachel Horick, who is the host for all these JMBE Lives and does such a wonderful job in engaging everyone. So thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing your manuscripts coming in. Take care.